Welcome back to Data-Driven Leadership. I'm your host, Jess Carter, and on today's episode, we are going to talk about elephants and data, and we will learn more in a minute. And with me is Dr. Jake Wall. Welcome, Dr. Jake Wall. How are you today?
Thank you very much. Great.
Good. And you are with the Mara Elephant Project, right?
That's right.
Okay, so let's get into it. Tell me what that is. What is the Mara Elephant Project?
So we are a not-for-profit conservation organization. We're based in the Masai Mara, Kenya. Started in around 2011, so it's just over 10 years. And we are very much focused on elephants and their habitats. And so MEP got started, or Mara Elephant Project got started in really the response to the poaching crisis. Around 2009, 2010, ivory markets sort of came alive again, and there was huge demand for elephant ivory. And there was a lot of killing of elephants in East Africa. Mm-hmm. And so in, I think, 2012, we measured 96 elephants poached for their ivory in a single year. So really, the Kenyan government needed help. They've got a tremendous wildlife service, Kenya Wildlife Service. But that was still, there was still that issue. So locally in the Mara, some funders basically got together to say, okay, can we specifically target and, set up response teams, provided money for collars. So we used GPS tracking collars on different groups, as well as an intel team that would look for information about people that were either poaching or buying ivory. So all of those things together and with close partnership with the Kenya Wildlife Service, made an impact. So after about 3-4 years, the poaching levels in the Mara came right down, and some of the gangs that were operating there, were broken apart and exposed. Okay. So MEP really started as just a couple of teams with that goal to stop ivory poaching. Since then, it's expanded greatly, though, organization. And what you saw is that the poaching sort of issue, came right down. But what you were seeing is that human-elephant conflict was on the rise. So, interesting. So our rangers were getting calls from community members in the surrounding area saying, hey, there's elephants that are broken through the fence and they've come in to our farm and they're cooperating. Can you help us move them out? And so that became sort of the next big issue that MEP sought to tackle.
Wow. Okay. So a couple questions. Is this a Kenya problem only?
No.
Okay.
It's wherever you have range states,
okay.
So elephant range states. And because of the nature of elephants, they are destructive. They're big. They need a lot of calories.
Yeah.
And so, an easy way for an elephant to get big and strong is to eat, corn, and crops that people are growing. So anywhere you have people living closely to elephants, we're seeing, across the continent that there are issues with conflict and it's very hard to keep an elephant out of your farm, without putting in a lot of investment into protecting your crops. So, many farmers in Kenya are not wealthy at all. They're largely subsistence, and just don't have the means to protect their crops.
Okay. And is it is that part of is protecting the elephants? Is there this? I may be kind of missing this, but if they keep stomping on my crops, I'm going to want to protect my crops. And then that was kind of part of the cause, or it could become.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of the conflict we're seeing is sort of in the moment.
I see.
And elephants, because they're very intelligent, they know that they need to do it at night. So they sneak into people's crops at night. Elephants, strangely, can be very, very quiet as well. And you think that, but a herd of elephants can pass right by you and you wouldn't even.
Oh, wow.
Because they've, you always associate elephants with being loud, and they can when they trumpet, but when they're just walking, they can be very silent. And you could have, a situation where you wake up in the morning and you've got a couple of acres of corn missing.
Oh, wow.
From a group of elephants.
Okay, got it. And so you're on a data podcast.
Yeah.
And then people are probably wondering, how are you using? So you talked about the GPS trackers. That's cool.
Yeah.
But walk me through, what does data have to do with, or how did you use data to help solve some of these problems or challenges?
Well, I think it's at all levels. I think really data is what led us to understand the problem. So,
Okay.
So there's first with poaching, for instance. So there's a data monitoring program in place set up by the IUCN. It's called MIKE, Monitoring of Illegal Killing of Elephants.
Okay.
So it's a very specific way that you assess a carcass, and you can say, what was the cause of death, what was the means of death, what was the age of the carcass, and all of that data is then compiled, and it tells you the story of what's happening. So the proportion of illegally killed elephants versus the ones that are naturally killed. And so by looking at sort of that pike ratio, gives you a sense of, do you have a poaching problem versus just, say, a drought that might have killed lots of elephants. But,
Okay.
So it's really a data-driven approach to understanding the problem. So that was the first. And with conflict as well, we have the concept of sort of a digital ranger, so they're not just going out and chasing elephants and leaving and that's it. We record everything. So we record, where it happened, when it happened, what the crop type was, or whether it was infrastructure. We also record, was there success? Did the elephants come back? So we're compiling all of this data and using that information to help guide our all management activities, and also then sharing that data more widely to understand the overall, trends of the ecosystem.
Okay. And this may sound, again, ignorant, but here I am. So I don't deal with elephants all day, but we'll have like foxes in my neighborhood or some deer, right? So so one of my questions might be, why are elephants important? Why are they worth protecting? Which I realize is maybe an assumption here, but might be good for listeners to hear that. And then two, is there adequate space for them? Right. What does that look like in the future?
Yeah. Well, that's another very good question that data can hopefully answer.
Okay.
So, we consider elephants important. Well, they're a very likable species.
Who doesn't like an elephant?
There is actually bias in conservation because, you think of all the things that make up an ecosystem.
Yeah.
But elephants in particular are important because they're considered sort of a keystone species, which means that they have the ability to shape their environment. And so, which is very true in Mara. So if you look back to the early records, when in the late 1800s or mid 1800s, there was the previous scourge of, it wasn't poaching. Well, it was poaching. It was the ivory trade started in East Africa. And we don't have many records, but basically there were hardly any elephants in the Mara at that time. So from about 1890 to the 1920s, there was very high poaching, very few elephants. So early hunting records showed that there were maybe a handful of elephants in the Masai Mara.
Okay.
What we saw from other records is that savanna ecosystem transitioned into a bush ecosystem. So it was a lot of bushland, which meant that tsetse flies, which thrive in that environment, that population expanded, which brings trypanosomiasis, which is really deadly to cattle. And so the Maasai people that were living there lost a lot of their cattle and this bushland ecosystem. With the establishment of protected areas and the decline of the ivory trade, the elephant population started to rebound, coupled with an increase in fire. So between fire and elephants, the bushland went back to a savanna ecosystem.
Wow.
And which now allows, the wildebeest migration. So elephants can have a profound effect on the ecosystem in which they're living. They also dig water holes, which allows, the collection of water, surface water in areas that it doesn't normally occur. Because, elephants dig for minerals in the ground and then they naturally create these depressions. Water comes in, which provides them water points for the animals. The other effect that elephants have is that eat and break trees a lot. We think of that as very destructive, but actually what one of the functions that serves is that when a tree collapses and you've got sort of grass and areas underneath the tree, that actually prevents grazers from getting at that. And then during times of drought, those become seed banks effectively to reseed the area of grass. So there's lots of really neat ecological functions that we're seeing elephants performing that are just now being found out.
That's amazing, and I didn't know any of that. So I think would back that for me. History and there also weren't. If my education serves me there wasn't really much protection of elephants in that time either, right? So that's like a new thing in the last 100 or so years, right? Yeah,
and in fact, there was hunting all the way up until the late 1970s in Kenya. Kenya has been very progressive always with its approach to wildlife, in my opinion. And so, they were banned hunting early on. They've been very vocal about the ivory trade, and I don't know if you've seen before, the burning of tusks. So obviously, when elephants have died naturally, and Kenya Wildlife Service collects the tusks and they stockpile them. Many countries are saying, we should be selling those to fund conservation, but in practice, it just doesn't work like that. And so Kenya has taken the stance that let's just burn the ivory.
Wow.
And make sure people know that it's worthless.
Wow.
It's not something that you should be coveting. And so, so I think there's been, quite progressive conservation practice. I think one of the challenges in Kenya, though, is it is a fairly small country space-wise, and especially in terms of land that is arable and where people live. And Kenya's also got a very high population growth rate. And so that will be the next thing. And that's something we're very, concerned about is your question,
right.
Space for elephants. Like, where do you, and how do we prioritize? How do we work with government to, supply data? So one of the key questions Kenya's asking right now is, where are the corridors and where are the areas that different wildlife species thrive and need? And so it's identifying those from data and then making informed management policy around that.
Interesting. It's almost like I think about in my hometown where there's zoned areas where you can buy a property and it's zoned for something. It's almost like, is the property going to start to be zoned for elephant life or human life?
Yeah. Well, that's an exercise that's underway right now.
Interesting.
To identify connected corridors, basically. So, and how can we keep those open for wildlife?
Wow.
But it's very complex because every species is different in terms of its own human ecology, and how it, so the wildebeest migration is this incredible thing that occurs in the Mara, Serengeti Mara, and you have 1.4 million wildebeest that are migrating annually. And about 600,000, I think, come onto the Kenyan side of the border. Elephants also move. It's not quite the same. It's not a migration, but we call it connectivity. So they move from areas of core range use, and then but seasonally sometimes they'll move, and we're actually not quite sure if the drivers of these movements, but elephants will perform using long distance movements sometimes. So we have elephants, that can travel 50 Ks plus in a day and end up in another area. And so through the radio tracking or the GPS collars, that gives us really good insight into where those sort of connected linkages between different areas of core range.
That is so interesting. So that was going to bring me back to some of the technology. Is this, I don't know, how you're doing all of this and the data that you're using? Is it all Mara Elephant Project's data, or is how are you doing some of this?
Well, yeah, I mean, we fund a lot of the data collection, but we're very trying to be very open with the data sharing with government and other partners that can benefit. So I think traditionally there have been issues in certainly academia, but in conservation as well. But it's also been a technological barrier for the ease of sharing data, and sometimes it's just for lack of technological tools to be able to do that. So we're working closely with different groups, and we now have very good means of sharing data, and so that's helping conservation tremendously.
Awesome. That's really cool. Well, so just out of curiosity, when it comes to the technologies and the data, what's been the hardest part? What's been the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think it's keeping in sync with technological advances, and so I think conservation, conservationists have traditionally been sort of more biologists or field ecologists, and haven't had sort of strong data science or computer science backgrounds.
Sure.
And so a lot of the advances that have been happening without that sort of linkage back to how can it be applied. What we're seeing now is that because biodiversity and conservation are becoming more important, that climate change as well is becoming more important, and we're now seeing investment in sort of bespoke technology to solve actual problems. And so it's not just forced to use a software that was created, say, for some business analytics, but now we're actually developing software for conservation data analytics.
That's awesome and a huge leap. Because I was imagining that conservation wasn't innately investing in the newest technologies all the time.
Yeah.
To go from that to we're creating our own analytic solution.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And there's been rapid advances too. I mean, globally throughout the world with AI, with cloud computing, but I think, as conservationists, we're starting to take better advantage of those things. So we've one such system we've been working on is called Earth Ranger.
Okay.
And so that's a platform that we started, well, a long time ago, but it was really invested in by Paul Allen, and starting in 2015. And he put a whole team of developers on it. It's now become a really amazing platform for collecting ecological conservation data and helping manage protected areas. And so that's a free and open source platform now that we use. It's been adopted in 450 sites across 62 countries so far. And the program's really scaling beyond that in the coming years. So that's been really great, because now we have this fantastic new cloud-based system that we can collect tracking data straight into.
Great.
We can get our data out. We can visualize it using a really up-to-date web app. We have a associated mobile device now as well that we can use. So it's not, it used to be that if you wanted to track your vehicle, you'd have your Garmin, running, and then you'd get the SD card out, transfer that to Google Earth, and then maybe import it into QGIS or Esri, and then you'd be able to. Now it just goes, straight from the mobile phone through the internet into the back end, and then you can visualize it, and you can see, what the vehicle's doing in real time, or what the elephant's doing in real time.
Okay.
So that's really made a difference in terms of data management and taking some of the headaches out of that.
Well, and usefulness of that. So that's one of the things I was going to ask you is, so digital rangers. So you had tracking these elephants and literally helping you understand, like, if they're heading towards someone's field or somehow intercepting, like what?
Yeah. So there's a few things you can do.
Okay.
It depends on the situation.
I'm a farmer. What do I do?
Yeah. So you've got this group of elephants coming in. They're not leaving. Say you're banging a drum, or you're hitting a paint can or something, and elephants aren't leaving. And elephants can be dangerous. I mean, you don't want to be close to an elephant on foot. You can easily get crushed. So that's where the map rangers could come, or the Kenya Wildlife Service rangers, and with a vehicle, use the vehicle to try and push the elephants out.
Okay.
If that doesn't work, then we might shoot flares, like a Roman candle, and make an explosion. Sometimes that doesn't work. So now the latest piece in the toolkit has been drones. So
Interesting.
All of our ranger teams now carry a drone.
You should have led with that. That's so cool.
Simple to complex, but
wow.
The drones are an amazing tool because and especially, with thermal cameras, you can fly them at night. The sound that the drone makes kind of sounds like bees. And so we think because elephants don't like getting stung, just like all of us, and it's been well documented that they will move away from bee swarms. So the sound of the drones seems to really annoy them. And you can use that very effectively to sort of push the group. The limitation, of course, is you get about 20 minutes of battery time before you have to bring the drone back, swap out a battery. But we've used, MEP's been really pioneering this technique and has used it very effectively to push elephants.
It's like a big annoying swarm of bees.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
See it, and they just can have very good hearing, so they.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about drones. I have like two, the like little neighbor kids flying in my neighborhood, and I'm always like, where is that?
Yeah.
It is annoying.
It's
but if you had better ears, I would be very, very, very out that is an incredible plan.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Now, unfortunately, drones are expensive, so
sure.
Not every farmer can own a drone and do this themselves. So it's not necessarily sort of the tech, solution,
right?
But it's a very, very effective tool in the toolkit.
Yeah.
We're also exploring sort of another data-driven conservation approach, which is that we've set up a farm right in where we know elephants go, based on the tracking data, and we've started growing crops there.
Oh, wow.
And so we've got what's we're calling a selection study. So we have these 5 by 5 meter plots, and we're trying everything. So we've got corn, we've got tomatoes, we've got rosemary, lavender.
It's a buffet.
It's a wildlife buffet. And the elephants, and I think all the farmers around us think we're crazy. We don't protect anything. So we just let elephants, hippos actually are the main culprit because it's right on the Mara River.
Okay.
So we have lots of hippos coming through. And our team basically studies and they record every time any species of wildlife eat something from the farm.
Okay.
And so everything from birds to elephants to giraffe to anything that comes through. So we've been running this for a couple of years now and building up the data set. And we're hoping to have results soon on sort of the selection preferences for different crop types and have actual data that we can use to make informed, comments on, if you grow this crop, you might get a little bit of predation, but it's probably, and then we're also coupling that with an economic study to see, and a social study to see, is this something that would be viable to grow? Would community members even want to grow it? Could they sell it? We don't want to make recommendations without having the data.
Yeah,
so,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So it would be a moment to come back to the farmers and say, here's what we've learned. Here are some opportunities you can make if you just change crops, and maybe even economically, here are some better opportunities anyway.
And things like lavender, we've never seen anything eat lavender. And it seems like, that would be the great choice. But what do you do as a farmer with a field of lavender if there's no market?
Right.
Or, we can't create a market for that, or it's so low cost per yield that it doesn't make sense. So we don't want to make recommendations purely based, off the selection alone.
Sure. Though we could put on your website this huge push to buy Kenyan lavender.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there could be conflict-friendly
lavender. Yeah. That's super, super neat. And it's interesting to me how much conservation, technology, and the economics are all critical to solving this problem. It's not just one of those things.
It's really trying to understand the ecosystem as a whole, and people are very much part of that ecosystem. And I think as conservationists, ecologists have traditionally kind of excluded the human side of it, and it's actually the thing that we need to be focused on. And I think that going forward, conservation we need economists, we need social workers, we need health workers, we need it's actually the confluence of all those things that will link to the success of an ecosystem. So in that vein, we over the last year, we've been working on something called the Greater Mara Monitoring Framework. So we recognize that we really should be structuring how we're monitoring the health of the ecosystem. So just the way you go to a doctor and they measure blood pressure and cholesterol, and height and weight, and all these metrics that make sense to the doctor to interpret and give you a health check. We need the same for the ecosystem. And so I've been working with a number of researchers and government partners, and we've compiled what we're calling this monitoring framework, and it has indices across ecology, across the human-wildlife interface, and the social, economic, and cultural aspects as well. So, if you don't have a healthy cultural index, for instance, then that, could really severely impact the ecosystem. Or if you've got things like, too many livestock, so we're trying to compile all of this into a framework. And then we need to, some of these things are being monitored, but there's many that aren't. And so we need to actually get investment to be able to monitor certain key indicators. Wildlife numbers, so we have to do aerial census work to be able to count overall wildlife populations. Sure. We need better vegetation monitoring to understand, because when you look at it, it's like, there's lots of green grass, but people will tell you that, our cows aren't getting as fat as they used to. And it turns out that the species composition has changed. And so, what's been driving that? So it's not just that there's grass, it's, how much protein and energy is in that grass. And so so we need much better monitoring to be able to paint a better holistic picture of what's happening across the system.
Sure. Well, and culturally, so I was kind of curious about this too. I mean, as a leader who's leveraging data to help impact this meaningful change in Kenya, I'm imagining that there are a lot of entities that have to collaborate. You're collaborating with government, you're collaborating with other conservationists, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I imagine that, sometimes usually data problems, the data is always the hard part. It's the collaboration.
Yeah.
But also the culture, like you have on top of all of that, you have I think you said you're Canadian. And so if we're in Kenya, we're working with people, I'm curious about the data literacy. Like, do people believe the data when you show up? Is there buy-in immediately? Like, do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that that's a gap as well.
Okay.
I think as, science, so I think what happens is you've got, really bright scientists that are doing incredible work, collecting data, publishing that as papers, but there isn't that next step of how do we communicate our results from the paper to the community and back to government. And there needs to be a better link between the research and the policymakers and the managers. And we've seen this clearly recently, where key politicians have no idea that, actually there's wildlife decline, or there's, the river flow rates are half of what they used to be, or, there's all kinds of these environmental issues, but no one's really seen those because they were in some, academic journal, but that just hasn't been connected back. So, through this monitoring framework, because monitoring isn't necessarily science. It's not inference. You're not analyzing the relationships between things and the causal or correlations. You're simply saying, here's the temperature over time, or here's the grass cover over time. But what we're trying to do is surface that information in a way that's more consumable. So right now we've partnered with Earth Ranger with the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. We're based in Seattle. So we're co-developing now a system that we've built at MET over the last few years called Ecoscope, which is a open source Python library at the core. But it's meant to take data and create outputs easily. So we built Ecoscope to both interface with Earth Ranger. So if you have tracking data or event data that the carcass information, or and then we also have a module that can talk to Google Earth Engine. So Google Earth Engine is this incredible cloud-based remote sensing platform that basically has the entire public remote sensing catalog available. So Landsat data, MODIS data.
Okay.
And so we could connect, our tracking information to remotely sense data. We can use Ecoscope then to do these different analyses. So we can look at things like trends in vegetation greenness across the Mara, or we can look at, the trend in rainfall is estimated from satellite, or we can do wildlife home range analysis.
Wow.
So now we've partnered with the AI too, to co-develop Ecoscope, and we're going to put it into Earth Ranger as a sort of dashboard, and that will make it much easier for someone to look at their protected area and define, okay, what's going on in this protected area? What are the wildlife doing? What's the rainfall? When was the last fire that occurred? And then they can start to make hopefully better informed decision making for management.
That is so cool. It feels like you're taking decades off the process of research, and then it finally hits the faces and hearts of the people that need big change to, hey, there's a dashboard. You can build, the time matters here, the speed in which we can put the data in front of you.
Yeah, because we don't have years and years to take to collect the data, compile it, publish a paper, and then present a graph that, hey, maybe the grass composition has changed, and we need to solve, and maybe that's being driven by, say, an increase in goats or something. So we have to make a decision then, do we allow, as many goats to be there? So, but that cycle has to be really sped up. And we just don't have time. So technology plays a huge role in that. And investment in these tools then allows us that very much quicker iteration.
Right. I mean, the sensitivity, some of that is you're learning the sensitivity of the ecosystem while you're trying to intercede. And so the ability to have technology that can move quickly enough for you to discern the sensitivity and react to it, or start to prevent. That's neat.
And doctors have 1,000 years on top, ahead of us in terms of, many patients and the statistics to kind of say, well, if blood sugar gets out of this range, then you're effectively sick. We don't have that luxury anymore. It's sort of a patient of n equals 1.
Right.
And we have to figure these things out. And so some of the decision making isn't going to be based on, a huge statistical sample, but I think the better that we can expose certain trends, metrics, the better that we can actually manage the system and understand it.
Yeah. Well, and you answered my sort of wrap up question here. I was going to ask you, in light of how sensitive all this can be, and the fact that data is always changing because there's more people than there were before, there may be more elephants, which is good. But what is success? But it sounds like that ability to monitor and intervene and manage. I mean, is that success? Isn't just that there's all the things on Earth, right?
I mean, we really think of it sort of in terms of this theory of change, right? Okay. So you've got activities that you do, which lead to outputs, which hopefully lead to outcomes and then impact. And so we're also, the way we are thinking about it is in terms of, well, we monitor our activities, we monitor our outputs, and we have to be looking at that impact level though. And so everything we're doing, from the ranger patrolling through elephant tracking and everything. So we're sort of using that theory of change framework to help guide us in terms of where to put our energy and limited resources that we have.
Well, and I was going to ask you that too. So limited resources wise, do you have major funders? How does it work for Borrow?
Yeah, so it's entirely donation based. We are, we do get a little bit of grant money, but mainly it's donor funded. And so we're quite a small organization relatively. But I think some of the impact we're doing is quite high. And so, we're always keen to get funding and we need funding. None of this happens without people saying, hey, I want help. In terms of the technology development, we've also really benefited from people volunteering their time, developers. And so we've, we have a gentleman in Vancouver who for the last few years has donated his time. And he's been coding for us. And, we built an app, for instance, to measure and map infrastructure. So we have a very, like I said, bespoke tool now, where we've mapped over 6,000 kilometers of fence line using this. And so, but without that tool, it would be very, very laborious from a data perspective to collect that information. So, his volunteering has really led to an impact, and we've made that data available. It's now informing government decision making. And so it's been incredible. And then another group that I've worked with, they volunteered their time, and we built something called Elephant Book, which is now a way that we can collect information on individual elephants, and you're built in machine learning, and we're developing a model to help us re-ID elephants. And so using that system, we now have a catalog of 1,100 elephants that we know in Mar. And that's all been through volunteer hours, basically. So it's really incredible when you get the right sort of people together, what they can do in their spare time.
That's amazing. It's neat to see that you're providing that passion too, because I do know a lot of people who are in tech, and it gets to a point where they want something that connects them to making the world a better place, making it more meaningful. And the fact that, we have a lot of times, even in our own consulting firm, where we ask people, do you want to go serve at a food kitchen?
Right.
And they're like, I would love to use my developer skills to do something meaningful. So I think it's neat that you guys, accept and receive that.
Yeah. So if anyone listening is a developer and wants to get involved, it'd be fantastic. We found lots of work.
That is so cool. Also, speaking of that, if people want to learn more about Mar Elephant Project or you, where do they follow you? How can they find you?
I think our website's the best place to start, and we're on all of the social media. So marelephantproject.org is our website, and please.
Yeah. Well, hey, seriously, thank you for joining us. It is a gift that we get to, and part of the data podcast too is to help people understand how great leadership and data can actually lead to meaningful change. But it doesn't happen without passion and purpose, and you obviously have that. So appreciate you being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. And so, guys, thank you for listening to this episode of Data Driven Leadership. We'll catch you on the next one. If you have any thoughts about what you want to hear from us, please rate, review, and let us know. We'll see you on the next episode.